She laughed softly and said, "You always show up when he's gone." It was meant as a joke, but the way her eyes lingered told me there was more behind those words than either of us dared to admit. It started like most simple afternoons do, with me walking across the narrow strip of grass that divided my small rental from their larger, well-kept home. I wasn't planning anything more than a quick favor. A loose shutter on their porch had been clattering in the wind for days, and I finally worked up the nerve to offer to fix it. Her husband wasn't home. He rarely was. Work, travel, business, I never asked for details, but I'd gotten used to seeing her carry groceries alone, or sit on the porch in the quiet evenings. That day, when she opened the door, the sun was pouring in behind me, so for a moment her face was softened in the shadow of her home. Then she smiled, that calm, steady smile that seemed both practiced and genuine at once. "Afternoon," she said, brushing a strand of dark hair back as if to steady herself before letting me in. "You didn't have to bother with the shutter. But I'm glad you did." Her voice carried that easy confidence women seem to grow into over the years, not rushed, not trying to impress. Just present. At 24, I wasn't used to that. Most people my age were in constant motion, restless, eager to fill silence with noise. But she let the quiet stay. I grabbed my small toolkit and stepped onto the porch, and for a while it was only the sound of the screwdriver turning, the wood creaking back into place. But every so often, I caught her watching from the doorway, leaning against the frame with her arms crossed. It wasn't an impatient look. More thoughtful. As if she were seeing something she hadn't expected. When I finished, she invited me inside for a glass of water. I followed, and instantly the air changed. Her home smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and fresh coffee. Afternoon light spilled across the kitchen counter, catching the fine lines around her eyes that softened when she laughed. She poured water into a glass and slid it across the counter toward me, her fingertips brushing the rim just as I reached for it. "Thank you," I said. My voice came out softer than I intended. She tilted her head, amused. "For the water or the company?" I looked up, startled, but she was already smiling, as if she hadn't meant it to sound the way it did. A gentle laugh escaped her, filling the kitchen in a way that made me want to stay longer than I should have. As I turned to leave, she leaned against the counter, her blouse catching the warm light. "You know," she teased, "you always show up when he's gone." I tried to laugh it off, but something in the way she said it, half joking, half curious, stuck with me. Walking back across the grass, toolkit in hand, I couldn't shake the sound of her voice. It wasn't just a comment. It was an opening. An opening I wasn't sure I had the courage to step through. A week later, I saw her struggling with grocery bags in the driveway. The late afternoon sun was dipping low, turning the sky the color of honey, and there she was, balancing paper bags against her hip, trying to nudge the car door shut with her elbow. Before I could think twice, I jogged over. "Here, let me help," I said, reaching for the heavier bags. She looked up at me, strands of her hair slipping loose from behind her ear, and gave a sigh that was half relief, half amusement. "You're going to spoil me," she said, surrendering the weight. We carried the bag side by side up the walk. Her arm brushed against mine every so often, light and unintentional, but it set something restless moving in my chest. She smelled faintly of vanilla lotion, the kind that lingers quietly without announcing itself. Inside, the kitchen was warm, the counters already cluttered with earlier shopping. I set the bags down and started unpacking without being asked. It felt natural, handing her boxes of pasta, setting fruit into a bowl. She didn't tell me to stop, and I didn't want to. At one point, we both reached for the same jar of tomato sauce. Our hands met on the cool glass. Just a small touch, her fingers grazing mine, but enough to make me pause. She laughed softly, pulling her hand back. "You're efficient, aren't you? Or clumsy?" I muttered, trying to hide the way my pulse jumped. We kept moving, finding an easy rhythm together. She teased me when I put cereal in the wrong cupboard, and I teased her back about stocking 3 different kinds of tea as if it were a survival necessity. The kitchen filled with a kind of lightness I hadn't expected, not forced, not staged. Just easy. When the last bag was empty, she leaned back against the counter, crossing her arms. You know, most people your age wouldn't waste their Friday helping a neighbor unpack groceries. I shrugged, leaning against the opposite counter. Most people don't make the best coffee in the neighborhood. Her eyebrow arched, playful but curious. Flattery at 24? Dangerous combination. The words hung there for a moment longer than they should have. The smile on her lips was light, but her eyes searched mine, as if measuring whether I understood the line she was drawing, or whether I'd cross it. I cleared my throat, pretending to study the last bag on the floor. Well, someone's got to make sure the pasta gets shelved properly. Her laugh rang out again, softer this time, and something about it made the kitchen feel smaller. Closer. When I finally left, I could still feel the ghost of her touch on my fingers from that brief brush over the jar. It was nothing. And yet, it was everything. It was one of those evenings when the air felt heavier than usual, the kind that makes you want to sit outside and let the world move a little slower. I found myself on her porch, 2 steaming mugs of tea between us. I couldn't remember how it started. Maybe I'd dropped by to return something. Maybe she'd simply invited me without thinking much of it. Either way, I was there, and the moment felt almost natural. The porch light above us hummed faintly, moths circling it in slow spirals. Beyond the fence, crickets filled the silence with their steady rhythm. She sat angled toward me in a wicker chair, her blouse sleeves rolled casually to her elbows. The tea's steam curled upward, carrying the faint scent of chamomile. For a long time, we just sipped and listened. I liked that she didn't rush conversation. With her, silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding, like the pause between heartbeats. Then, almost as if she'd been waiting for the stillness, she spoke. It gets quiet here when he's away. Her voice was steady, but soft. Some days I don't notice it. Other days. She trailed off, exhaling into her cup before shaking her head, as if dismissing her own thought. Never mind. I watched her, the way her fingers tightened slightly around the mug. She had this way of seeming so composed, but I could sense the undercurrent, the quiet weight she carried. You don't have to explain, I said gently. I get it. She glanced at me, and in the dim porch light I caught a flicker of something, surprise, maybe, or relief. You're young, she said after a moment, a wry smile tugging at her lips. I don't mean that as an insult. Just, most people your age don't sit still long enough to listen. I shrugged, leaning back in my chair. Maybe that's why I do. Because most people don't. Her laugh was soft, almost startled. She looked away, out toward the quiet street, and for a few moments the only sound was the creak of her chair rocking slowly. I wanted to ask her more, what it felt like, how often she felt that loneliness, but I didn't. Instead, I let the silence do the work. And she must have felt it, because her voice returned, quieter this time. Sometimes I wonder if anyone really sees me anymore. Not just the role I play, but me? The words settled between us like fragile glass. I didn't move, afraid the wrong gesture would break it. I met her eyes. I see you. Her breath caught, so small I almost missed it. She looked at me for a long time, her gaze softening, studying, as if weighing the truth of what I'd said. Then she smiled faintly, and though she said nothing more, I felt something shift. Not in the porch. Not in the night. In US.It happened one evening, not long after our quiet porch talk. I had stopped by again, this time to return a small dish she'd sent over with cookies a few days earlier. She welcomed me inside, as if it had become second nature now, and the house felt warmer than usual, a faint trace of cinnamon in the air. We stood in the kitchen, lingering in small conversation that neither of us seemed eager to end. She moved with that easy grace she always carried, sliding a glass from the cupboard, offering me water without asking if I wanted it. I leaned against the counter, pretending to study the faint scuffs on the floor, when the glass slipped from her fingers. It didn't shatter, just landed hard against the tile and rolled to the edge of the counter before clattering to a stop. Ah, she breathed, kneeling quickly to pick it up. I dropped down beside her without thinking, reaching for it at the same moment. And that was when it happened. Our hands met over the smooth surface, skin brushing skin. Just a second, maybe less, but the kind of second that stretches endlessly. The tips of her fingers pressed lightly against mine, and I felt a warmth climb up through my chest, sharp and unexpected. She froze. I froze. Neither of us looked directly at the glass anymore. I could hear the faint rhythm of her breath, steady but drawn tighter than before. My own pulse thundered, far too loud in my ears. For a moment, it felt as though the entire house held still with us, the tick of the clock, the hum of the refrigerator, all waiting for what might happen next. Then she shifted. Slowly, carefully, she drew her hand back, brushing her skirt as though dusting it clean. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice softer than usual, almost hesitant. I passed her the glass, trying to steady my own voice. "No problem." She stood, turning to the counter, setting the glass down with more care than it needed. Her shoulders rose with a quiet inhale, then eased down again. I could see the faintest tremor in her hand as she smoothed a lock of hair behind her ear. The air between us was different now. Charged. A thread pulled taut but not broken. I stood too, trying to find something light to say, anything to release the weight pressing in around us. But nothing came. And when she finally glanced at me, her eyes lingered a fraction too long before flicking away. It was such a small moment, barely anything at all. Just fingers brushing over a piece of glass. Yet walking home later, the memory replayed again and again. The way her touch lingered in my skin. The silence that followed. The unspoken question in her eyes. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't even an admission. But it was enough to tell me that she had felt it too. The rain had been falling all evening, a steady, relentless curtain that blurred the streetlights and turned the sidewalks into shallow rivers. I hadn't meant to end up at her door. I'd gone for a walk to clear my head, hoping the storm would wash away the restlessness that had been clinging to me all week. But when the thunder rolled low and close, I found my steps slowing in front of her house, and before I could second-guess myself, I was on the porch, knocking softly against the wood. The door opened, and there she was. Barefoot, her hair tied back loosely, wearing a simple cardigan that made her look more at home than I'd ever seen her. For a heartbeat, she just stared at me, rain dripping from my hair, shirt plastered to my skin. "You're soaked," she said finally, her tone a mix of surprise and concern. Without waiting for an answer, she stepped aside. "Get in here." I obeyed, water pooling at my feet as I crossed the threshold. She disappeared for a moment and returned with a towel, draping it across my shoulders with gentle firmness. Her fingers brushed against the back of my neck as she tucked the edges in place. The warmth of her touch seeped through me faster than the fabric could absorb the rain. "What were you thinking, walking out in this?" she asked, not scolding exactly, more like she wanted to understand. I shrugged, clutching the towel around me. "Bad day, I guess. Needed air." She studied me for a long moment, her eyes softer than her words. Then she nodded, as if deciding not to press further. "Sit down. I'll make tea." The living room glowed with a quiet warmth, the lamps casting a golden hue that made the storm outside feel distant, almost unreal. I sank into the couch, the towel draped over me like a shield, while the sound of clinking cups and boiling water carried from the kitchen. When she returned, she handed me a mug and settled on the other end of the couch. Not too close, but closer than usual. The rain pattered against the windows, filling the silences between us. For a while, we didn't talk. I just let the steam from the tea warm my face, my fingers curling around the mug. Then, almost without meaning to, I said, "It feels different here. Like the world slows down." She glanced at me over the rim of her cup, her lips curving faintly. "Maybe that's not the house. Maybe that's you." Her words settled in me, quiet but heavy. We sat there, shoulders not quite touching, yet the space between us charged with something unspoken. I should have left sooner, but I didn't. I stayed until the rain eased, until the storm faded into a soft drizzle. and when I finally stood, towel still around my shoulders, she walked me to the door. "Don't wait for another bad day to knock," she said softly. I carried that sentence with me into the night, warmer than the towel, heavier than the rain. The storm had passed days ago, but something of it lingered between us, like the way the air feels charged even after the thunder is gone. I found myself back in her living room one quiet evening, the kind where the world outside seemed too still, too ordinary, compared to the pull I felt here. She was curled into one corner of the couch, legs tucked beneath her, a soft throw draped over her lap. I sat at the other end, though not far, close enough that if either of us shifted, our knees might brush. The television hummed faintly in the background, some movie either of us were really watching. Her eyes flicked toward me during a pause in conversation, and there was something different in them. Not playful, not guarded, but searching. As though she'd carried a thought too long, and could no longer keep it silent. "You know," she said finally, her voice low, almost hesitant. "Sometimes I feel like I'm fading. Like I move through rooms and no one really notices anymore." Her words were soft, but they hit hard. I turned toward her, my chest tightening at the vulnerability in her tone. "That's not true," I said. "Not even close." A faint smile touched her lips, though her eyes glistened in the dim light. "You make it sound so simple." She hesitated, her fingers smoothing the edge of the blanket as though gathering courage. Then, more quietly, "You remind me I'm still seen. Still noticed." The silence after stretched long. My hand inched across the cushion between us, almost without permission, as though drawn toward hers. I stopped just short, my fingers hovering close enough to feel the warmth radiating from her skin. Her gaze dropped to the space between us, lingering there. Her breathing slowed, each inhale measured, careful. When her eyes met mine again, the weight of everything unspoken pressed heavy between us, the longing, the restraint, the ache of what we both knew but couldn't name. For a moment, I thought she might close the distance. My chest tightened, my pulse quickened. The whole world seemed to balance on that fragile thread of almost. But then, gently, she pulled her hand back into her lap, tucking it beneath the blanket. Her voice barely above a whisper. "It's late." The finality in her tone was soft, not sharp. Not rejection, just a reminder. A boundary. I swallowed hard, nodding. "Yeah. You're right." The television murmured on, but neither of us really heard it. The moment had passed, yet its echo clung to me, the warmth of her nearness, the gravity of her confession, the ache of my own restraint. When I left that night, the cool air outside did nothing to steady me. My hand still tingled with the memory of how close we had come to touching. And for the first time, I realized just how dangerous almost could feel. The next morning, sunlight spilled across my small kitchen table, but I couldn't focus on anything in front of me. Not the half-eaten toast, not the book I'd tried to read. My mind kept circling back to the night before, to the weight of her words, to the near touch that still buzzed faintly in my fingertips. By late afternoon, I gave in to the pull I'd been fighting all day. I crossed the lawn again, dish in hand just as an excuse, though I knew neither of us really needed one anymore. She answered the door with that familiar calm, though I noticed the faintest pause in her eyes when she saw me, like she had been expecting me all along. She stepped aside without a word, and I followed her into the soft glow of her living room. We talked for a while about nothing, the weather, her garden, the small tasks that filled her morning. The ordinary words felt like scaffolding, holding up the fragile quiet that wanted to slip between us. Finally, she set her tea down and looked at me, not with the teasing smile she so often wore, but with something steadier. "I should thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For always showing up. For being here when it matters." Her voice caught on the last words, just enough to make me realize how much they meant. I shifted closer, not out of boldness, but because the space between us suddenly felt unnecessary. "I don't come because he's gone," I said softly. "I come because I want to. Because you matter to me." Her eyes glistened, and she blinked quickly, looking down at her hands. For a moment I thought she might deflect with humor, the way she often did. But instead, she stood and crossed the small distance between us. She slipped her arms around me, not tentative, not guarded, but fully, as though she needed the contact as much as I did. Her cheek rested lightly against my chest, and I felt the steady rhythm of her heartbeat pressing into me. My arms wrapped around her, holding her close, the warmth of her body grounding me in a way words never could. We stayed like that, not rushing, not explaining. Just breathing in sync, two people who knew the lines drawn around them but still found something undeniable in the spaces between. When she finally pulled back, her hands lingered at my sides for a moment longer, her eyes searching mine with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "You've become important to me," she whispered. I nodded, my throat tight. "And you to me." There was no kiss, no grand declaration. Just that lingering embrace, that unspoken understanding. As I stepped back out into the fading light of day, I knew what we had might never be simple, might never be easily defined. But it was real. And sometimes, real was enough.